I don't care if a scientist knows a tremendous amount of stuff related to how to improve your performance. Who cares? I need to get this transferred to the athlete. Giving the person time to recover is still the best. Yes, there's some other nuggets, and there you have to look at your programming and not only your supplements. If we want to break those plateaus in the sport, we need more than just hammering everyday high intensity CrossFit style workouts. We need to understand what effect those workouts have and how long you have to recover from which type of workout and how to periodize this very well towards, in most cases, the games or Rogue Invitational.
Welcome to the Upside Strength Podcast, the show that will help you get your health and your performance to the next level. Whether you're a recreational or competitive athlete, a coach, a physio, or even just someone who's curious about sport, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. Gommaar, second time on the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you back. We actually just recorded a podcast for your channel. That's the first thing I'm going to do here today is I'm going to encourage everybody to go to the wod-science YouTube channel and subscribe because the content you guys have been pushing out is highly qualitative and everybody should watch your videos. So Gommaar, for those that don't know you yet, tell us a little bit about who you are and tell us a bit more about all that great content that's coming out on YouTube those days.
Yeah, thanks for the heads up. YouTube has been a journey. It's been very fun and very challenging, but very interesting for sure as well. So tell me a bit about myself. I'm a Belgian, so maybe you can hear about my accent. I'm not a native English speaker, but I'm from Antwerp, Belgium. I studied sports, let's say sports physiology there. In Leuven, which is let's say the biggest university in Belgium, and I started, let's say, doing so I'm more an academic. I started the academic route, where I did an PhD in exercise physiology, actually altitude physiology, back in the lowlands of Belgium. We don't obviously have any mountains, but we have a very sophisticated, let's say, an altitude acclimatization room where you can actually put it at 5,000 meters of altitude by reducing the oxygen. And I did some studies in humans there, understanding the effect of high altitude on muscle mass loss. So I'm always been interested in muscle exercise physiology and also muscle biology, and how low oxygen environments decrease your muscle mass, because it's known that people, when they go to the Mount Everest for 4, 5, 6 weeks, they lose up to 15% of muscle mass. And it's known not only because of the lower energy intake, but it's also just because of the hypoxia of the muscle. So that's my let's say my area of expertise back in the day during my PhD. And then I got an opportunity to follow my then not really PI, but close to PI, Katrien de Bock, to ETH Zurich, one of the better universities in Europe and in the world, to dig more into the molecular biology side of things. So really understanding why the muscle loses, let's say, or why the muscle gains or loses mass related to exercise, but also nutrition, which enzymes, which pathways, and how this biochemistry works. I worked with mice, with rats, with cells, with humans, all to understand those principles. And obviously, though there was a bit less, let's say, exercise physiology per se, but always have been interested in this. And then I came across CrossFit and high intensity sports when I was still doing my PhD. So that's like 14, 13 years ago, quite a long time ago. Got introduced to it. Came from a very, let's say, conventional way of thinking, pure gym work, be very non-aggressive. How do you say that? So with weights, yeah, making sure that you lift well and so on. And then I came into a CrossFit world, and everything was turned upside down. But obviously, like most people, I found it very interesting. And also I found it interesting from a, let's say, more muscle physiology point of view and from an exercise physiology point of view, because you always combined that the metcons, like the conditioning part where you have to breathe hard, but also the strength. And you did that in one session. And then I for example, I'm quite good at like heavy lifting, just genetically. I never did any deadlifts, just metcons and squats. And then I just every 3 weeks I PR'd my deadlift. So why is this? I never do deadlifts, but still I improve, and yeah, that's why I found this super interesting. But I remained, like, let's say, in the academic side of things, doing studies, 100% employed by the university. But I became more and more frustrated with the whole process, let's say 6 years ago, 5 years ago, because I was doing very cool studies that were also useful for athletes, but also for coaches like you, but no one got to read them. Like no one get like no one reads scientific literature except for your peers. I can have a cool anecdote later on that, but let's keep it relate to that. And yeah, so I was thinking, what can I do about this? Like, I cannot just sit here and share my studies with my friends on Twitter, my peers on Twitter. And then I talked to some people in the CrossFit world, and Lucas Esslinger back in the day is a friend of mine because we worked out in the same gym here in Zurich. And he said, "Man, you should go to Instagram. You should actually post some stuff what you do in Instagram." And I never really liked Instagram, and I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah," because most of the CrossFit people are there, and I think they must be very interested in the science you put out and the studies you do. And so I started, and also had some athletes on the channel. That always helps. And yeah, organically this grew and grew and grew, and it's more and more interesting, I would say, and people really like our content, I would say, from an organic point of view. And we just disseminate scientific literature that I think is interesting for coaches, practitioners with wod-science. And let's say the last 6 months, it got a little bit more serious because it was just a side job, just a fun thing to do. Got a bit more serious because I got a grant from a Stiftung, a foundation in Switzerland, to work on wod-science, science communication a bit more within the walls of university still. Because they like this stuff. They like science communication, obviously, and they provide me some money so I could actually dedicate some hours per week to make content. And then YouTube was founded because you need a lot more time. You know that better than me. Than just 2 hours in the evening for YouTube. No, you need to be dedicated. You need to understand how this whole platform works. So yeah, that's why I'm starting to put out some YouTube stuff as well, because I think it's better suited to really dig deep into certain scientific topics, not really scientific, applied topics, in video format, but yeah, this takes some time. So that's also what will be, let's say, 50% of my profession going from September onwards, so next year, also this year September, to really have the content creation out, and also to gain some revenue with this by with wod-science, while also being employed by the university as a lecturer. So I teach exercise physiology, advanced topics in exercise physiology to university grade students. So that's a little bit both the best of both worlds, in my opinion. And that's the thing what I love. So I'm very grateful that I can do these things.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
That you're gonna have more time to dedicate to content creation. Like you said, your guys' Instagram has
Yes.
been outstanding for years now, and I highly recommend everybody goes and follows you there. Really good, kind of short takes and summaries of either studies or broad concepts in
Yeah.
exercise physiology that we can understand and apply to CrossFit. I think those are great resources, and like you said, I think there's not enough communication between the maybe harder or kind of the academic side, the purely research and publishing endeavor, and then communication to coaches and making those ideas applicable on the field. So I think your work is extremely important and valuable too, because coaches want to be up to date on what's going on and understand those concepts. And if you can't make the link between the studies and reality, then you're going to be losing something in the middle there.
Yeah, and I think if I may, in certain, let's say, areas of academia, it's not really applicable. It's probably better that those things stays within peers. For example, whatever deep physics or philosophy, or maybe not even philosophy, but certain social sciences and so on. But sport sciences, like exactly what we always do, exercise physiology, it is made for the coach. An exercise scientist, it's not important for an exercise scientist. It's you try to improve the athlete or improve the health of the general population. I don't care if a scientist knows a tremendous amount of stuff related to how to improve your performance. Who cares? I need to get this transferred to the athlete, right? And that is where I think some of these concepts lack. And yeah, there's clearly how do you say that in English, a hole in the market, like it's just a gap in the market, right?
White space,
because the white space, because yeah, you have to think about the incentives. scientists don't have the time. It's obviously a lot of time consuming, and the universities, they don't really push it. They sometimes, some universities push it a little bit, but there's not enough incentive. So it has to come out from your heart, like trying to actually do it for the society. And yeah, that doesn't always align with the value. So it's a yeah, it's an interesting concept that we started, and I'm grateful that we can keep doing it.
The first topic or first question I want to ask you, Gommaar, relates to that experience that you have, your background in academia, but now you're very applied side as well, right? Who goes towards uh, making things concrete and usable on the field. For coaches that are listening and that want to be maybe more rigorous in their way of thinking, more in tune with what is happening on the research standpoint, but still obviously live and breathe every day in the gym and coach and be on the field. How in our minds can we better bring those two sides together, the practical, our experience, empirical evidence, and then what we find in research papers? How can we blend those two to get the mixed the best of both worlds, so to speak?
It's to be honest, it's a very difficult question because it has to come from the first problem is not all coaches have access to the research papers. That's a whole different rabbit hole, but they're paywalled. So even
Yes.
if you are a coach and you want to read those scientific papers, it's not always that easy. Although, to be honest, you can get probably your hands on if you even send a message or an email to the first author and so on. You get those PDFs. I think you have to rely on good sources of information and that like for example like us that try to make this transfer from academia towards the scientific concepts, find some good paid newsletters, some YouTube channels. There is definitely stuff also like yours out there, um, and go from there. You can read, for example, some people ask always, which books do I have to read? Books are good, but they're outdated, obviously, certainly related to research papers, because this goes a lot quicker. So find the right sources. It's not easy. It's not a great answer that I can give you, but just it's not really there. We try to do our best and be open to understanding maybe scientific literature. So to the best way to do it is to read a couple papers, even though in the beginning you won't understand that much. It's a lot of jargon and so on. But after a while, I mean, you just talked about it yourself. You also did it, maybe not from a super academic background, but you can do it if you dedicate the hours and the work.
Hmm.
Because I think, and that's also what I explain to my students, the master students that are health scientists, exercise scientists. I tell them always the advantage you have by doing this, let's say university studies, is that you can read academic papers. That's a massive advantage because you can actually have access towards that information, and
Hmm.
if you're smart you can apply it. Other people also have access, certainly now in the digital age, but it's a bit more difficult. All right, so that's something you have to do, and listen to podcasts. I think good, let's say, health scientist definitely is Peter Attia. You know him for
Hmm.
sure as well. He's a very big podcast, but he's quite well evidence based. Andy Galpin,
Hmm.
he started podcast Perform, I think 2 weeks ago. He's a little bit same, let's say, profile as me. He's a professor, but he started a big podcast related to performance, not always CrossFit, but also that's, I think, good sources of information. And then learn how to read scientific papers by just doing it. I mean, I can give you some theories, but you just have to do it. I always see it by my students as well. In the beginning, they fail miserably, but then if you give them 2 or 3 assignments, they get into it, and it's just a trial and error and learning.
I think that's a good starting point. And then for those that want to go and dedicate more time to reading the scientific papers, to digging into the literature, can you tell us from a broad kind of perspective what, for example, to have a very simple, concrete one, what is one scientific paper worth versus a meta-analysis, right? And everything in between. How can we judge the value or the weight that we should assign to a given study or to a given paper? So if you can give us maybe a couple tips on what we should look out for whether it's sample size, the type of paper, etc., so that people can understand, how good is really this study. Because today it's easy to just throw a scientific
Yes.
paper around and say this study said that,
Yes.
and just use the abstract or just use the headline. But how can we be a bit more meticulous about that?
Yeah, there's different types of scientific papers, right? You already alluded to. You have the meta-analysis, and you also have RCTs, like randomized controlled trials. So there's two ways of looking at it. I think the most important is to look at the methods. How are the methods done? So if you have to learn one thing about learning to read a scientific paper, it's obviously not the abstract, that will probably be quite easy, but it's the methods. And the methods are related to how is a study set up. And that's important. So the best way of doing a study is that a person or a group is their own control. I give you an example. I just did a study actually 2 weeks ago where we tested 3 different drinks on muscle protein synthesis, or how well they, let's say, have the capacity to build up muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do this in 2 different ways, right? One way would be just on the same day, you give 3 different groups of 12 people, let's say, all a different drink, and then you compare the 3 groups. That's a way, it's not a bad way, it's a way of doing stuff. A better way, and that's also what we did, is the same group, 10 people, come back 3 times to the lab. So it's a crossover trial. And then they are their own control. So if you find studies, for example, in supplements, where people are their own control, where they come back after a rest period or a week of washout, those are mostly the most reliable papers. Good. So these are the randomized controlled trials. And then you have, some people say it's higher up. You have, as you said, the meta-analysis. That means that it looks at 20, 30, 40 different studies within the same topic of research. Is whey protein good for increasing your muscle mass? That's the question. Obviously, there's, let's say, 200, 300 studies who have investigated that. Some are good, some are bad. What I mean with good is those randomized controlled trials, what I just explained. And some are just without a control group, pretty trashy, right? And then it tries to pile these studies together and trying to understand what the actual effect of whey is using a larger sample size with different studies. So only reading meta-analysis is probably also not the way to go, because it's a bit superficial in some cases, and sometimes details are omitted. So I would like you to learn how to read the RCTs, the high quality RCTs relate to certain topics, that I think can help you more to understand what's happening, whatever, in your topic that you're interested in. So and then you have on the lower side, so less quality research would be case studies, where you have one person that is followed. Again, it's all subjective. Sometimes I think that case studies are highly valuable and super interesting, because case studies are done with Lance Armstrong. How did his VO2 max increase over the time with all his EPO and without EPO and so on? Obviously, you cannot do that in an RCT. So is it then an inferior study? In my opinion, not. Right? So it depends a bit. But in general, if you have a specific question, that like a big question, meta-analysis together with a randomized controlled trials.
I like that. I like that double perspective. And I also find it very interesting to read a broad range of types of papers. I know for myself, digging into different topics, there's certain things that I figured out only because I had read maybe 5, 6 different papers, not even on the same topic, but there was maybe a paragraph on, I think it was more specifically, it was about fat oxidation and how fat oxidation works inside the body, and why does one burn more fat than another, which seems to have to do with your mitochondrial volume and essentially the lack of pyruvate that you're gonna bring in. But anyway, I only figured that out because I kept searching through different papers, and then I was able to draw those lines. And I guess that's another thing that is very enriching from reading those different perspectives, is trying to build that web of understanding, your own kind of model of how things work. But like you said, that takes time, and you have to also be open to not every stream of information agreeing with the other one. That's maybe another question we could dig into, especially in today's very polarized world in terms of information. Information is everywhere, but the sources and the quality is not always the same. How can we be the most critical with our thinking when approaching different sources of information, so that we can build our best model possible of what we're trying to learn in that situation?
And a smart person 5 years ago told me, when I put out this question to him, I said, "Yeah, how can I make sure that poor information is like banned, or that people don't read it?" That was my question. And obviously, he said, "You can't. It's a bad perspective. You just have to provide better, high quality information, and that's when the people who, yeah, trust you or whatever, trust your sources, will then come to you and read you." And this is a little bit how I see it as well. Um, you it's impossible to give you a straightforward answer to this. You just have to be open to several sources of information, and then, based on, let's say, the highest quality sources, which are randomized controlled trials, you make up your own mind. And this mind will probably not always be perfectly correct on every subject, but that's maybe not important, right? It's still, you just want to, yeah, be more intelligent for yourself, and so you can provide the best products or services to your, yeah, the people that you serve. And that's a little bit how I see it. I'm not going to bother about other sources of information too much, to be honest. With wod-science, we try to just, yeah, put out the best information according to us, but that's also sometimes a little bit biased. I'm not going to deny that, and people have to understand that. But yeah, that's just again a very difficult task for lay people to do this, and there's no one way solution. The only solution is put in the work, read different topics and high quality sources, and after a while you will get towards the right answer, I would say.
Yeah, your story there was interesting, and I think it's a really important point too. Is that if you're not confronted with the quote unquote bad information or lower quality information, how do you know that what you're reading is actually high quality? Right?
That's true.
You
Yeah.
need the bad to contrast the good, and vice
Yeah.
versa. Without light, there would be no dark, and so forth, so on and so forth. So actually reading the lower quality stuff in addition to the good
Of
stuff,
course.
and like you said, making your own mind up and drawing your own conclusions is very important. Bouncing off of that subject, what topics, what ideas have evolved the most for you over the last couple of years? What has changed in your understanding, on your perspective? Is there anywhere you did a full 180, or where you course corrected a little bit based on new information, based on your experience? What has evolved the most in the last couple of years for you?
So, two things, mostly related to studies we did ourselves. I think then you have the best experience, and yeah, that's something that you can learn the most from.
Mm.
First, we did a study not so long ago together with the University of Basel, actually a pretty cool study, where we tested 60 super high profile CrossFit athletes in the lab. And in the lab, I mean conventional exercise physiology lab. We did testing with a mask, VO2 measurements, lactate testing, critical power testing, so endurance testing. And then we also did strength testing, but we didn't do clean and jerks or deadlifts. We did like on a machine, yeah, isometric force measurements, right? Like how you would measure isometric forces in the lab. And then we also obviously measured anthropometrics of those athletes, how tall they were, how long their femur
Mm.
was, and so on. And we wanted to understand, most importantly, want to understand their basic physiological, let's say, profile.
Mm.
How fit are these people in a exercise physiology standards, not CrossFit standards, but like compared to other sports, right? Because we have critical power, we have those strength measurements in other sports like
Mm.
weightlifters. That's one question. And the second question was, how were certain physiological parameters correlated towards their open rank? We took the 90, so the 5% best people from the open, and also within those we had elite athletes where they went to the semifinals and even the games. I think 6 athletes went to the game, so sorry, 7 athletes went to the semifinals and 4 went to the game. So that's a very good cohort. Not easy to assess, obviously, and that's also where wod-science came in. We could recruit them via wod-science, so that's also pretty cool. Anyway, and what we saw, I thought, VO2 max will be an important factor. It was not. At all. There was zero correlation between how high the VO2 max was and their open rank. And this is interesting because we had some differences in open rank. Obviously, we had very high open ranks from the games, but also 95th percentile, which is good, but I mean, not extremely good. And those were not different. Strength, same. We couldn't find any differences between our high profile or lower profile. I mean, slight differences, but not substantial difference. The difference where we saw, or the aspect where we saw the most difference was in their anthropometrics. So how, obviously, the smaller or the shorter femurs they had, the better they performed in the open. Okay. Right. And that's something, it's actually something that most people already think. But if you talk about CrossFit open performance, which are within the gym exercises, so burpees, snatches, pull-ups, it's contrasting to semifinals, which in games, which have more, power output and other modalities exercises. Important to differentiate. We see that just how your anthropometrics are is determining for a large part how well you perform. So this was not really a 180, but it was quite surprising. I would have thought there were more differences. Maybe you can link the study in the description. It's actually out now. You can read it. And what is important is that within the women, where there was a higher spread in performance, like usually, right? There were some smaller difference related to performance variables. For example, the counter movement jump was actually indicating an increased performance, which is a measurement of explosivity or strength, right? So it's not 100% what I just said, but large percentage related to that.
It just highlights how much sports select. Right. If you look at 100-meter sprint, if you look at a 5,000-meter track event, and you look at the profiles, the sports select themselves for the profile that's going to do the best. So I'm not that surprised that the anthropometrics play such a big role, especially because we know that many of the patterns in CrossFit are similar. I mean, the squatting pattern is such an important one, whether it's for wall balls, whether it's for thrusters, all those movements essentially rely on you having a good and efficient squat. And that's something I know you talk about a lot as well, is the important in efficiency and economy, right? How much does it cost your body to do 100 air squats? That is very, very important, because at the highest level, where you have the smallest margins, it's whoever can do the work with the least amount of essentially costs required, right?
Exactly. 100%. Like this is exactly what it is. And if you then have a 3% higher VO2 max, it doesn't really seem to matter too much. Important, relate to this. It's different now when you talk about the semifinals, because just as an anecdote and example, we saw Jonne winning both the open and the quarterfinal, but didn't get, maybe he was a bit sick and so on, but still, he didn't get towards the games. It's not only likely not only because of him, but also a little bit because of the programming, because the taller, very powerful athletes, look at the Americans, Jason Hopper, Dallin Pepper, and so on, Jelle Hoste, they all relatively easily got themselves into the games, right? So it is, which is good. I would say, but maybe if CrossFit HQ is listening, it's important to account for this also in the open style workouts, because Jelle Hoste or tall athletes, they just have zero chance to do any decent scores in the open, because just the fact that they're tall. And it's unfortunate, because you can actually choose some of the modalities. If you add one workout which has predominantly for taller athletes, for example, some rowing and some wall balls, you see a complete shift in the whole leaderboard, and that's potentially more fair, because on the later stages in the games, and in the semis, you do see larger athletes actually doing as well or even better than smaller athletes, which I think if you want to crown the fittest on earth, you shouldn't select for anthropometrics, in my opinion. But that's obviously my opinion. And at least our study showed that open style CrossFit workouts are, selecting for smaller athletes. But yeah,
Yeah, and I guess to make the previous statement even more accurate, we could even say that not only does the sport of CrossFit select, but the stage of the CrossFit competition
yeah,
selects, which, like you said, is, I mean, hard from a logistical standpoint, right? Because you can't put very advanced movements in the open as long
of
as we
course.
want everybody to do the open. That's maybe a conversation for next year's plan and see how they organize that. On the,
Yeah.
since we're on the topic of programming CrossFit competitions and the semifinals, what's your perspective on the evolution of the programming over the years, and more specifically between last year and this year? Do you see any big changes in the semifinals, the qualifier for the games, and what does that mean in terms of who gets to go and who doesn't?
I mean, from what I heard and also looked at a little bit the programming, it was a bit less on raw strength this year compared to
Mm,
other years. This is very important. It's again in the hands of Dave Castro and CrossFit HQ, so who knows what happens next year. But if you are a CrossFit athlete, it's obviously super important, right? Like, where are you going to focus on for next year? Is it strength? Is it endurance? It's probably everything, right? So yeah, that's one thing. There was not, for example, in the quarterfinals, there was not a pure 1RM lift,
mm,
not in the open, zero. It's unfortunate for me because that's my stronger point, but that's out of the question here. But but who knows? Next year it's probably different. But what is known, that if you get in towards the semis and the games, it's a relatively strength power biased sport.
mm,
Maybe I don't know if you agree with that, but if you just look at the physiques of those athletes, I was at the semis. They're very muscular, very mesomorph, and have a lot of like power output in a relatively short period of time.
mm, mm,
And that is something you just need in the semis and in the games, because most of the workouts are just built like that. Even though they're highly aerobic, you just need a large anaerobic energy output for sure as well. So if you are an aspiring semi or semi-finalist or games athlete, I think you need to hit the strength numbers. If you look at the bell curve, you want to be in the middle. So you just want to hit, let's say, the center of, or a little bit better compared to your peers on strength. Not too good potentially, because then you probably will lose out on certain other aspects such as conditioning, which are also important.
mm,
And yeah, just look at the bell curve. Where is the mass of or the median of most athletes, and there you want to be, because you want to excel at everything and not be the best at one specific point, because then you probably are not going to make it towards the highest level. So yeah, that's something you can do your work on, your homework, and look where all the numbers are related to 2K row strength, like back squat and so on, and where you at. Are you genetically really predisposed to be super strong? Potentially try to shift yourself more to the middle and improve on other parts. That's something that you have to look at with your coach, obviously.
If you had to give us maybe 3 to 5 metrics to look at in every either group of movements or physical quality. So if we take about conditioning, for example, what's the
Yeah.
3 to 5 metrics to look at? What about strength? What about weightlifting? What about gymnastics? If you had to give us kind of a back of the napkin kind of idea of what's the most important stuff to look at as a CrossFitter.
Yeah, it's very hard to be specific on CrossFit. What I can provide or tell the listeners and the viewers, go have a look at the table in the study that I just talked about, where we profiled
Mm,
the athletes, so the high profile athletes, on all those aspects that you just said, going from the 10th percentile, 25th, 50th, 75th, and then the 99th percentile on VO2 max, on certain strength parameters, and even we have self-proclaimed clean and jerk, back
mm,
squats, and so on, what they had to put out as a questionnaire. We also put that in. So if you that those numbers are required to get it to the highest level, because we also have a specific category for the elite, so the semifinalists. So we know, for example, the VO2 max, if you go to a lab or your testing facilities and you hit a VO2 max of 58, you're in the ballpark of what elite CrossFit athletes usually have, right? It depends a little bit on the measuring devices. So if you are there and the physiologists there said, man, this is actually too low, you should try to aim higher, or you're not equipped to do such high competition sport, it's probably not true, because high profile athletes have the same VO2 max, right? So that's maybe something you can look at, and that could be important for talented athletes that are interested in getting to a higher level. Yeah, and then it's hard to know exactly, related to specific movement qualities, for example, amount of chest to bar pull-ups and so on. There I cannot really comment on at this stage. This is something you have to look at with your coach, I would say.
I like what you said about the VO2 max, because obviously we know VO2 max is a very important metric, both in health and in performance.
Yes.
And more specifically for endurance sports, we know that VO2 max is necessary to be great, but it's not sufficient. Meaning that obviously, if you have a low VO2 max, you're never going to be great at an endurance sport. And we could probably draw that parallel that if you have a VO2 max of 40 as a male competitor, you've got work to do if you want to get up there. But once you get up there, even if it's high, it doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be good, because there's other variables that are going to come into play. And most notably, I guess, the movement efficiency that you have, and your competency across all movements, not having any bottlenecks like a handstand push-up that's going to limit you because you're going to blow up and you can't do a few reps in a row. So once we get to that level where, let's say, our physiology is up to snuff, what are the other things that we're going to be able to make the difference with besides that movement economy?
Yeah, just during your question, I was thinking about movement economy. Actually, maybe I have an interesting nugget on this.
Absolutely.
We are. So movement efficiency related to CrossFit is very difficult to measure, right? Like, what is movement efficiency? You could, for example, measure VO2 with a portable device and then do whatever 20 power cleans and see how much oxygen you consume at certain weights, and then tweak your technique and see if the oxygen consumption is less or more. That's something you can do, but that's obviously highly physiological, and I don't think that many practitioners would actually do that. But we are collaborating, and I cannot tell you too much about it, but getting towards the stage that we can talk about it, with actually a wearable that you strap on, like a heart rate monitor, and based on AI and also like your accelerometry, you can guesstimate to a certain extent, but to a high degree, your power output during functional movements. So that's obviously super interesting, because we all know that power output is a very important factor in cyclical movements, such as biking and so on. But what happens when you do burpees? We all know that the heart rate goes up, but what power are you actually producing, right? And if you can then assess your power based on the amount of reps you do within a given time window, you kind of guesstimate your efficiency. And if you then have such a device, you can tweak around much easier than also measuring VO2 max. So that's something that we will also talk about later on, and that is so people are working on that in the CrossFit space. So I think that's quite interesting to understand your movement efficiency, because we and you always talk about movement efficiency, but how do you improve it? It's not so easy, because maybe you know Paula Radcliffe, a famous marathon runner. She looked very badly related to movement efficiency, but she was the best marathon runner for a long time. It's not always exactly how it looks that it means that if it looks good, that it's necessarily the best way related to movement efficiency. And this is, at this moment, we have no clue how to measure this with functional movements. Although we can do it with VO2, but as I said, it's not that straightforward. So that's one point that I would like to make, and that is I think something that the sport will progress in, because movement efficiency, also at the highest level, I talked to John Singleton from the program, is really always looking at that. But also it's not so easy for him. Like he understands the technicality of the movement, and he tries to be as technical as possible, but it's not always necessarily true that this person will then be more efficient. That's more difficult to measure. You could also use nerves, for example. That's actually also a good idea
Mm.
to measure oxygenation during certain movements and then assess your efficiency. But again, not the most straightforward ways. And we're working on such a device that will hopefully come out pretty soon on the market. So yeah, that's just an insight.
Hey, real quick, I've prepared a free mini course to help you understand everything that you absolutely need to know on training zones, how to train zone 2 for your sport, and how to organize your endurance training in general. You can sign up for free using the link in the description. That's really interesting related to power output. And like you said, technique is one side of it. Is the other side just volume? How many reps you do, and
Yeah.
how, because the more you do something, the body just finds ways to make it more efficient, more economical. And in the case of Paula Radcliffe, like you said, her VO2 max decreased over her career, but her movement economy, running
Yeah.
economy went up, and
Exactly.
that allowed
Good
her
point.
to get better and better performance. So it's not necessarily the raw output, it's really how much that movement is costing you.
Yeah.
And for her, at least, it seemed like just the years of running, the volume of training was one of the main drivers of that economy. Would you say that,
Yeah.
would you transfer that to CrossFit and saying that, you know what, you want your thrusters to cost less than they did before, then you just got to do more of them?
I mean, it depends a little bit, but yes, obviously, overall training volume is correlated with training adaptation, not
Mm.
necessarily one to one. That's
Mm.
important to understand. It's not always the more you do, the better. Always hammering the intensity every day, day in, day out, will probably get you overreached and also tired and not progressing. But if you periodize your training plan well, and you can always accumulate more volume every cycle, every whatever 12 weeks, you have a higher chance of actually improving your performance. That's for sure. A good way of doing this, because again, CrossFit is a very special beast and something that we don't know much about. But what I like to do in my programming and also for myself is, for example, to see if I'm progressing, I just do an EMOM of 10 minutes with a certain movements within. For example, week 1, I do 6 burpees, 12 calories on the rower, and 6 chest to bar for an EMOM of 9 minutes, for example, 3 rounds. And then the next week, I do always 1 rep more. And this is my progression towards whatever a certain amount of reps. And I know that also Willie George trains like that. And that's a good way to actually not not randomly, but actually structurally improve your total training volume and also intensity in this case with CrossFit by just doing EMONs and also improving the amount of reps. Because if you just always hammer metcons for time, how do you know you can do more metcons? That's one, but you want to do more reps per given amount of time. That's the goal of CrossFit, right? More work within the certain time domain. That's how you're going to win competitions.
Mm.
So that's how you can, for example, that's just some tip maybe for the listeners how to progress. But yes, as you say, next to just, let's say, good genes, picking the right parents, it's also picking the right coach, I would say, and picking the right periodization of your training.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to the idea of periodization. And I know you guys did a really interesting study
Yeah.
on hybrid training and how to plan different cycles of work. So we're going to come back to that. But before we talk about that periodization, planification of training, I want to come back to a topic that to me is very important in the CrossFit world, and I don't think we talk about it enough. It's the difference between the original philosophy and methodology of CrossFit and the current requirements to become better at competing in the sport of CrossFit. I have my own idea on the question. I'd love to hear yours. For you, what are the main differences that we need to be aware of when we talk about the methodology of CrossFit as it was written initially by Greg Glassman, and what we see today and what is necessary to compete at a high level in CrossFit?
Yeah, I mean, I just read an Instagram post very quickly on from CrossFit HQ themselves, and they said, "What is what you should be as, or what you have to try to be as a CrossFitter or doing CrossFit," and that's and they said, "Don't do too much, or you don't like too much low intensity work." That's literally what they said. So. I'm not sure if you alluding to that, but that's also my train of thought is. So CrossFit obviously is high intensity across varied time domains, I would say, and exercise modalities. And that's still a very great methodology for, I would say, 90 to 95% of participants. Just when they enter a CrossFit space, it's something they probably haven't done for forever, that high intensity. And it is shown in literature very clearly that if you do high intensity work, even sprints, 20-second sprints, 4 minutes rest, you improve your VO2 max, you improve everything. So there were definitely before research on that, and they're very correct. But you alluded to what you have to do as an athlete to actually make it to the next level, or to keep improving, to keep always setting the bar higher and higher of conditioning and also strength. And there, depending on the athlete and also the background of the athlete, I think low intensity work has its place, because the goal is, as we just explained, to accumulate as much volume as possible, so you adapt towards your training stimulus, and you also have more capacity to recover, and to recover within the workout, but also after the workout. And you cannot do that always by hammering always intensity, super heavy metcons. Some genetic freaks potentially could do it. I guess most of the games athletes actually could do it, because they're literally genetic specimens. But most people probably it would be helpful for most people that they incorporate some lower intensity training just to accumulate the volume. And then we're talking about, there's some very beautiful studies, also a meta-analysis actually, where they showed that volume of training, whatever volume, so that's literally times per week you train times the hours you train, at moderate to low intensity to even high intensity, is correlated with the number of mitochondria per volume of muscle fiber. So if you have more mitochondria, at least that's the theory, you have more capacity to convert chemical energy, such as glucose and fats, into mechanical energy, such as muscle contractions and ATP. You have more capacity to do this. You have a bigger tank in your engine to put more gasoline in. That's kind of how I see it. And again, you could do that with having super high volume, high intensity training, but most people are not built for that. They will just be destroyed, right? So in that case, it would be a little bit different than the initial CrossFit methodology, that you are an athlete, that reaching a plateau could also do some lower intensity training on top of their high intensity work. But kudos to them, kudos to CrossFit. I mean, only good words to them. For most people, it does work. If you do 4 times per week high intensity, relatively high intensity work with good movement efficiency, you will progress, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's great to distinguish between the different levels, right, and the needs of different types of athletes.
Highly important.
And we can't not, and that's probably one of the only things that I disagree on regarding to Glassman's, Fitness in 100 Words and the original CrossFit journals, is that maybe the beginner should not train exactly like the professional, and that's probably one of the only qualms I have with everything. Otherwise, I think most people should go and read the original CrossFit journal.
It's beautiful.
It's really well written. It's well thought out. I think it's fantastically laid out, and it's worth getting to know where it came from originally, right? Because the sport that it has morphed into is quite a different beast, I would say, than what the very kind of minimalist, minimal effective dose type of approach that they had at the beginning. But obviously it's a sport now, and you have to, compete, and you have to get better. And for that, you simply have to train. But what you said is interesting, the idea that the low intensity can become useful. And one limit that I hear, or one argument that I hear against low intensity, is using the argument of specificity. And people think that obviously specificity is important. It's important to understand specificity and what it means, but at least for me, it doesn't mean that every single training that you do should look like your sport. I think that's a misreading of specificity as a principle. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree because yes, specificity, if you are a CrossFit athlete, whatever, or even an RX athlete, 90th percentile in the open, and all of a sudden you would shift 90% or 100% of your training towards low intensity, yes, the specificity will drive you towards a triathlon and no lactate production and no power production, and you
Right.
will decrease your performance, even though your engine will become better, right? Like your total engine. That's true. But it's important to notice that most people don't do this. They maybe add 1 or 2 hours per week of cyclical work at low intensity, but then the most of the other work is absolutely high intensity. So I don't think it's really an issue. For most people, they won't overdo the low intensity work. Quite on the contrary, I would say.
Hmm. Can you overdo low intensity from your perspective? And I know that you've done a great couple videos on zone 2 training and on all those topics recently on your YouTube channel. What's your take on too much low intensity? How much is too much?
It's hard to put numbers on it. I also arbitrarily put on 20% of low intensity is kind of the upper limit for most athletes that require zone 2 training, which again is not the majority of people. So yes, I think you could overdo do it if you're 50% of all your work. Let's say you train 10 hours a week, right?
Hmm.
And 5 to 6 hours of those are pure low intensity work. Potentially you're missing out on some gains. Again, this is not exact science. It's still training principles, which is difficult to put down scientifically. But yes, you're pretty much decreasing your gains, because the goal for most people, including myself, is to train as efficient as possible with the least amount of time you have. Right? We are not all games athletes. Certainly not. We don't have 2 sessions per day. So yeah, what do you do to be the most efficient? And then you don't want to do 50% of your zone 2 of your work as zone 2.
Hmm.
So then, but overall, yes, you will lose a little bit of performance, but it won't hurt you. You will still be a healthy person, and nothing bad will happen to you. You see, it's just less efficient. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with
Not
you.
the end of the world.
I agree with you that if you don't have a lot of time to train, then maybe most of your hours should be spent focusing on the things that will drive you forward in terms of performance.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe when your work capacity, like you said, your recovery becomes a limiting factor, maybe we need to spend a bit more time on the low
exactly,
end of stuff and
exactly.
rebuild that tank, like you very rightly called it. I want to shift to talking about periodization a bit more, and for that, I think it would be interesting for you to start with the study that you did on hybrid training. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a study slash whatever pilot test,
Mm.
call it. So what we did with wod-science, the cool part about wod-science is we obviously have a big platform. A lot of people in the CrossFit high intensity world follow us, and 4 months ago or 3 months ago, we put up let's say an advertisement that people could sign up to. And what we want to know, and my interest related to CrossFit and just overall, is the interference effect. So CrossFit is highly interference all the time, right? Interference meaning strength interferes with the gains in conditioning and vice versa. And that's kind of the goal of CrossFit, even, right? So, but still, if you want to train efficiently, you want to limit those interference as much as possible, because you want to improve as much as possible in both sides, I would say. So as my experience as a coach, as a scientist, and also as a practitioner of CrossFit, we never cared too much about the interference, and we just did strength and then a metcon. I think 90% of all affiliates program like that, metcon, and then you do strength, or strength and then a metcon, which is fine. But I thought maybe there's another way of doing this, and maybe we can test this. So what we did, we made 2 groups of people who trained online. So it was an online programming. Obviously, they did their training in their home gym or in their affiliate.
Mm.
And what we did, we had basic conditioning, basic CrossFit programming range. So as I just said, first strength, and then conditioning or a metcon, 4 times a week. So 4 training sessions a week, so typical for your RX athletes. And then we had a group B, which is the hybrid group. And what those guys do, they did exactly the same training, and the training volume, exactly the same movements, exactly the same. But one week, week A, they did only metcons. So they hammered metcons 4 times, so 2 metcons per day. Then this was 4 times per week. The next week, they did only strength, so only back squats and compound movements. And we trained them for 9 weeks, and we did a excessive pre and post testing before and after those 9 weeks, and then we want to understand what their improvement in fitness were. And I will make a video about this specifically because the data is flowing in, but the data is actually now almost finished. To be a bit more specific on the data, but I can explain you here already. And I didn't expect that much because obviously it's not a super well-controlled study. It's not done in the lab. People have self-reported data and so on, but still it has some ecological validity. This means that a lot of people program like this, right? Like they're just remote programming. So there's also some pros and cons. But still, I didn't expect too much. But what we saw, we tested very strength-specific tests. So back squats, the CrossFit total we did, for example. And then we did and then we did CrossFit specific test. We did Fran. Everyone knows Fran, so there was less of a test bias because if you do a new test or get a new test, then the people will probably perform better the second one. Like that's always how it is in the open. Yep. But with Fran, it's not really the case because everyone knows Fran. And then we also did some other tests, for example, 2K row. And if you add all the tests together, so 5 tests this was, we had an improvement of 6% in the conventional group. That's quite substantial in nine months. So 6% better in reps and seconds, and 11% in the hybrid group. So, and this was significantly even. So that's quite a strong thing because it's very difficult in literature to find effects on performance because performance is very individual. Many things affect performance. We just talked about it. So actually in overall fitness, we saw improvements with the hybrid group. So this could actually shift the way people could program because it's not so difficult to implement this. You just do 1 week of metcons and then the next day you do strength and you actually improve more. And that's maybe something that people can think about. And maybe the last point, these people, because people that follow wod-science and are into it are probably into CrossFit for some time. They were on average 6.4 years of training experience. So they were not rookies. Right? They probably are sitting towards their plateau in CrossFit. I mean, if you do CrossFit for 6 years, you're reaching in some kinds of plateau, and they kind of broke through because, I mean, they improved by approximately 10%. That's just quite significant. And then not all tests improved. So all tests improved, but not all tests significantly improved in the hybrid group.
Okay.
So across, let's put it like this: both the conventional and the hybrid group improved across the board. So every test improved 2% to whatever 10%, but the significance was not always different. The difference was not always significant. So keep it like that. But on average, if you pulled everything together, which is the goal of CrossFit, obviously, overall fitness, it was significant. So that's, I'm still a bit super interested in this, and we're actually going to try to publish this because it's so nice. And it's also possible to publish this, I think. And this is a little bit of programming science that I think is lacking in CrossFit and even in cycling and everywhere, and that we can use the wod-science platform for, I think, to do more of those studies, I would say.
No, I think that's amazing, and I think people should support wod-science in what you guys do, and when you're looking for participants, people should volunteer and take part because it's such a great way to make the sport and also the ecosystem in which we evolve just become better. And obviously you're, like we said before, you're at the intersection between the field and the lab, and you can navigate both those worlds. But most pure academics wouldn't really care about going to test CrossFit because maybe it's a marginal sport, maybe it's not interesting to them because it hasn't been done before, so there's no references. And I know it's always very hard to beat that inertia, right? In academia, when there's nothing published on something, it's hard to get into it because you can't really maybe lean on to some bigger and older papers that are references.
Exactly.
But it's really interesting. Do you remember off the top of your head if some of the tests improved more than the others? Like, did the strength move more? Did the conditioning move more? What do you remember any of those?
Conditioning.
A bit. The conditioning improved more?
Yeah. So I mean, it's also a hybrid. So if I understand correctly, we did one test, which was a pretty brutal test, where we did max back squats at body weight. So body weight.
Yep.
And this, what is this? It's strength endurance, right? And this
Yeah.
also improved more related to. But the CrossFit Total, for example, did not improve more. It did, but not significantly.
Okay.
And that's a bit the thing. If it was always 2 to 3% more, but because of variation in the data, it was not significant. But it's still practically relevant. Every
Yeah.
test, the B group, that hybrid group was better, and that's okay. There's always some individual differences, but if you are someone who programs for a large amount of people, this is what counts, right? Like your general effects. So and Fran, for example, no, sorry, the 2K row improved significantly more in the group that did the hybrid. So and it makes sense because there is, even on the molecular basis, there's probably some overlap of enzymes that are affected by strength, and if you then do endurance, those are, let's say, blocked, so you don't have the effect of the endurance anymore if you do it in too close of proximity towards your strength, right? There's actually some molecular basis for
Yeah.
this interference effect, and that is pretty well studied because other researchers have been very interested in this. And even some practical studies in rugby, I know that's your background, showed, maybe I can also send you this one, very, very interesting study, where they actually showed that if you do the strength part in 6 hours or more after the conditioning part in rugby players, so a little bit the same as we did, they had better improvement in VO2 max and strength.
Mm.
So it is shown and very relevant to CrossFit, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think the time between sessions and the recovery between them to enhance the quality of
Yeah.
the following session is very important. Obviously, if you are going to do strength and cardio back to back, it's you're going to leave some feathers on the table, as we would say in French, versus doing strength early morning and then conditioning mid afternoon after you've maybe had a nap, had a food, had all those other things, and the time in between, like you said. You're going to
Yeah,
say something,
that's
yeah.
that's obviously. Yeah, sorry. It was a bit of lag. Sorry for that. So the thing, that the point that some people make is, and what you're just alluding to, is that, okay, I'm not an elite athlete, so I cannot separate my sessions. With our protocol, you actually can. You just do 1 week of this, and then the next week you do the other part, and you don't need extra time, or you can still do one session per week. So that's maybe why it's interesting.
Besides the molecular side, do you have any other hypotheses as to why there was such a significant improvement in the hybrid group versus the conventional group in the way that you spread out the training sessions in those weeks?
Yeah, I mean, as a scientist, I always have to be critical about my own work, and it could be that it's just a bias of the B group, that they just think they will improve more.
Hmm.
Because I just talked about the randomized crossover trials. This was not a randomized crossover trial. The
Because they
best
knew
what
that
you
they were
get,
in the hybrid group, right?
they knew they were in hybrid group, but I mean, on the other hand, if I would be in the hybrid group and I didn't know anything about programming, I would not necessarily think that I would get better by separating those sessions entirely, which I never done before.
Hmm.
So, but there is a chance of bias, which is a limitation. I agree. I cannot say more, but I think we just have to. If we are looking at real effects, we clearly. I think it's just basically molecular biology. You just have more time in between high contraction um, exercises, like high load contraction exercises and lower load contraction exercises.
Hmm.
And this has been shown on beforehand that, as I said, some mostly on breakdown, some genes are less affected then, which enhances adaptations on both spectra. So that I would say that that's my rationale. Um, yeah, I mean, the people, even we did it quite meticulously. They logged all their training sessions. We have all the training logs, so they did everything.
Mm.
They were really into it. They understood that they were in a study, that we really needed their data, and so forth. So yeah, it's pretty decent study for a research paper, I would say. Not the best, but also not bad.
I really like it, like I said, and that brings us into that idea of periodization, right?
Yeah.
Of having different blocks of training that are sequenced in such a way as to perform better on competition day, or as the outcome of the total training block to get better. And I think, and I know we see eye to eye on this. We've talked about it before. This is probably the next frontier in thinking and programming for CrossFit, because up until now we've been very focused on the training sessions, what type of sessions, what is your training week going to look like, but are we looking now at month to month, and then 3 months to 3 months, and the first 3 months of your training cycle versus the following three? So talk a little bit about this idea of periodization, which has been well studied for decades in sports science, that is commonplace in many sports, but it seems like in CrossFit it's we I would, my estimation would be that we've gone to the weightlifting coaches and we've learned from them. We've gone to the gymnastics coaches, we've learned
Exactly.
from them. Now we're going to endurance coaches, learning from them too. When are we going to the global planning coach and learning on how to organize our training year?
Which is arguably the most important one, I would say, because you can do, as you say, as you can hammer everything in one session and then have no effect, because there's so much interference and you just get very tired. So it's highly important, and it's understudied and also under, I think, performed within coaches in the CrossFit space. What I hear, obviously, I don't know every training program. So yeah, I mean, how you should think about it. I made a video about CrossFit programming, and I always think about try to put together skills and strength in one session, and then go towards more conditioning and endurance and metcons in another session. So that's in the micro side of things. This is something you can already apply quite easily on higher profile athletes I'm talking, but even within affiliates. So if you what I see a lot, which I don't understand, is you do skill work within a class, 60-minute class. You do skill work, handstand walk, for example. Then you do strength work, handstand push-ups. That's really good. And then you could, for example, do some strict presses to really top it up all that training session. No, what people then do is a 25-minute metcon, which involves all the movements. This is potentially not the best way for, I'm talking about affiliate programming. It probably is much better to do also a strength or a very short workout that is more power output compared added towards those skill sets, and then the next day do a more conditioning session with less strength. That's something on the micro cycle that you can always think about, to have a specific focus, skill and strength, compared to conditioning and metcons, and even high skill gymnastics, that you can then separate. And then obviously, yeah, you want to have high intensity work for 1 or 2 days, and then you always want to have an easier day. Doesn't have to be zone 2 training, but it could be some other, like less effect on the nervous system work, for example. That is also more on a weekly basis. You can look at it, and then again, you have to see a little bit on how you monitor your training load, because you can kind of guesstimate this by, hey, this probably is this hard for the athlete. But what I use, and I know that you also use this, is TRIMP. I call this TRIMP, training impulse. It's basically the RPE on a scale from 1 to 10 or 6 to 20, it doesn't matter, times the volume, the hours or the minute, let's say the minutes of training per block. And you can do that then for weightlifting, skills, whatever, strength. And then you can know very closely how much load, probably internal load, call this, there was on the athlete per week and per month and even per year. So that's how you can then more monitor. And I know that people work, for example, if you work with higher profile athletes, you definitely will have to work on weaknesses, right? For example, strength. Then you can really focus on doing 3 months of strength with limited conditioning. It's fine. Maybe their CrossFit performance won't improve at that point, but that's not the goal. The goal is, in most cases, the quarterfinals and semis for higher profile athletes. And that's what people sometimes forget. They just think, I have to be fit all the time. No, that's absolutely not the case. You actually, first of all, you're very fit anyway. And second, you want to build on certain parts, because you, again, want to limit the interference as much as possible. Interference is a thing. So if you can then structure your training, your months on a certain weakness while be conditioning or strength, that's something that I would also recommend, and that's also what we do in our general programming. For example, we have a season programming with wod-science just released, and what it's not, right? What it's not is just 60 minutes of cool CrossFit workout every so 4 times a week. That's what you've basically seen every programming. Nice CrossFit workouts, some strength, some endurance. It's not that. It's actually we have 4.5 12-week cycles where we focus always on one part, because we believe that we do functional conditioning. 3 out of 5 sessions are conditioning, and then we also have some metcons on the side to also improve your functional fitness. The next 12 weeks will be more strength with also some conditioning, right? It's not pure strength, it's also some conditioning. And then we just move towards, we'll always have one focus per cycle. And I think that will generate the best athletes in a general, let's say, programming platform, which is obviously suboptimal, but it's still better than just hammering 60 minutes of high intensity work every other day. So that's how I see it. And yeah, you have to think about it. Everyone has their own ideas, but the most important is that you do structure and that you allow for recovery for the athlete. Because whatever recovery strategy you use, high protein diet and whatever sleep garments and sleep supplements, the best way to recover or the best parameter is time, right? Giving the person time to recover is still the best. Yes, there's some other nuggets, and there you have to look at your programming and not only your supplements.
Did you know that I've recently started an all English YouTube channel? If you're not following me there yet, please take a few seconds to go subscribe to the Upside Strength English channel and get access to hundreds of hours of free content. Yeah, I think for everybody listening to this podcast, the last 10 minutes, your last answer is the most important. There's so many good things in there. I had to write 5 different things down to get back to. So I highly encourage people to go back 10 minutes, rewind, re-listen to this, take a couple notes, because there's a lot of gold in there. One thing that you said that I repeat all the time is you want to be fit, but when do you want to be fit? And I think this idea of wanting to be fit every single day and essentially testing your fitness every single day can be beneficial at the beginning because it creates buy-in, because you want to be with your friends, because you're going to improve every day, especially when you're a beginner. But when you reach a certain level, that actually becomes detrimental to your progress, right? The fact of wanting to be fit 365 days a year, in my estimation, is one of the biggest mistakes that competitors make when they want to get better, but they're plateauing. Because the reality is that you cannot be at your peak 365 days a year. And if you try to do that, well, guess what? Your body is so intelligent. It's such an incredible machine. And it's definitely the most advanced technology that we have access to today, well beyond AI and all those things. We don't even nearly understand how the body works. And yet it's still here and it does its own thing. And what it does is it regulates itself. So if you try to be at your best every day of the year, it's just not going to let you access your actual best, because otherwise you would break. So what's the solution? Instead of being fit every day, how do we pick and choose when to be fit?
It depends on the season, I would say. It highly depends on the season, and it depends on your what you want to do. Some people want to be fit during the quarterfinals. Most people, I would say, or open. Some elite athletes have also seem to have failed in actually periodizing and peaking towards the right moments. Because for example, just what I always thought, I never understood the competitiveness in the open of the elite athletes now. I never understood this. Really never. Okay, there's some money for grabs for the winners. And I mean, who am I to comment on what athletes do? But I never understood it, because you really want to cruise in those open workouts. Like, the last thing you want to do is push above your limit. You just want to use it as some kind of training day, zero interest, make sure that everything is filmed well, and then peak towards mostly quarterfinals and semifinals. This is the same. CrossFit, I know it's a new sport, but the principles remain the same of basic training science. It is, you cannot peak for 4 or 5 weeks in a row Not the best endurance athletes can do it. Look at Mathieu van der Poel, look at Wout van Aert. These guys, they have off seasons. And so you pick, to answer your question, you pick your competition that you find interesting, even though it's a low quality or low, not very important competition within your box. If you want to be good there, it's still very important to train accordingly. And then also after the competition, have a week or two off where you train much less, don't PR. It's all basic, let's say. You need a little bit of brain capacity to do this. It's all very basic, but still people clearly don't do it. They just come to the gym every time. They follow the affiliate programming, which is probably fine, but they just, don't periodize at all. And that's something, where there's a 5 to 10% improvement in overall fitness to be found easily. I mean,
Easily,
it has been
yeah.
shown that tapering improves performance by 5 to 10%, just tapering. So,
Yeah, exactly. And to drive that point home, and I think the important thing in parallel to that is accepting to not be fit all year, right?
yeah,
And knowing that at certain times you're not going to be in your best shape. And I have a very concrete example of this after semifinals last year with Claudia Gluck, number one woman in France. She needed to work on her strength. She needed to work on her running. So all summer she did that. 3 months of virtually no CrossFit and all of those. And then came the Rogue qualifiers, and they were especially brutal and especially heavy. And she got slammed by that qualifier. Uh, she was just not in CrossFit shape, right? She was coming out of a very kind of dissociated general fitness block of just building strength, muscle mass, and some running. She was not ready for the high level CrossFit that was required to qualify for Rogue. But after 2 months of building back her CrossFit, she got third at the Dubai Invitational, which is a great result given everybody that was there. And then more recently at the semis, she qualified for the games, following that same idea. And what I find fascinating about this, and that's I would encourage all the competitors or all the CrossFitters or anybody who's interested in getting better, of just trying it, right? Because all you need to do is say, okay, for 2 months I'll do this, and then for 2 months I'll do that. And it doesn't mean you have to drop everything within those blocks. You can maintain some qualities while you develop other ones, but just really be clear on what I want to focus on and what I want to get better on in those 2 months. And just doing that means you dedicate 4 months to learning about how to better plan your training. And guess what? At the end of those 4 months, not only will you have gained fitness, but you will have gained an understanding of how you can optimize your future training. And maybe 2 months wasn't enough to get back to peak CrossFit shape. Maybe you need a bit more. Maybe you need a bit less. Maybe you needed more time to develop your strength. But then you can adjust on the future cycles, right? And I think that's one thing that's missing right now. It's just taking the chance once of doing something like this and learning from it. Because what you're going to learn is going to change essentially any future training that you do.
yeah, fully agree. Fully agree.
And what's even more interesting to me is how this concept is fractal, because we mentioned it here on a more global scale, right? Of having maybe 2 or 3 months on one quality, 2 or 3 months on another. But like you said, it also works on the day to day, right? So trying to do the same thing every single day will work at the beginning, because anything works at the beginning for somebody who hasn't trained. But eventually you need to be a little smarter. And so breaking things up and dissociating, being really clear on, this is a hard day, this is an easier day, this is a push day, this is a developmental day, and doing that on the micro, on the week level, but also on the month, on the year level. And I think that conversation needs to take up more space.
Yeah, I fully agree. And this is where if you see the graphs, beautiful graphs, we once posted them on world records within sports.
Mm.
Obviously, you see in the 1900s, marathon times, whatever, 3 hours world record, they were drinking alcohol and milk during the race. But then, obviously, because of technology and also some basic training science and nutritional science, it went down and down. And then it's really flattening out until we're still almost reaching the 2 hour time, right, of a marathon for the males. In CrossFit, we are still, in my opinion, but it's hard to put into words. I mean, some data analysis could be done here. We're still in the linear phase, or maybe getting towards the more flattening plateau phase related to I'm talking about 1 RM snatching competition. I mean, back in the day, if you snatch 225, you were the hero. Now you cannot even make it to basically quarterfinals, right? So, but if you snatch 310 as a male, you probably are at the plateau and even at the higher point. And if we want to break those plateaus in the sport, we need more than just hammering everyday high intensity CrossFit style workouts. We need to understand what effect those workouts have, and how long you have to recover from which type of workout, and how to periodize this very well towards, in most cases, the games or Rogue Invitational. You see, so that's that's the art of programming, and that's the knowledge of the coach, and it's not easy, and certainly not in CrossFit. I think it's easier, for example, in high rocks or in other conditioning sports, much easier, but in CrossFit it's not that easy because everything is put together, and that's where you can separate yourself as a coach from other coaches, I think, or affiliates, for that word as well. Certainly also affiliates, very important here.
Talk about in those cycles when you're focusing on a given quality, what is required to maintain, say, strength compared to developing strength? I think people have a misunderstanding of how much it actually takes to maintain versus develop something.
Very little, very little. So you need. I mean, very little. It's again within CrossFit. It's hard to say because I mean, let's just talk about basic training science, like strength science. They most of the people say 1 session per week per muscle group is certainly sufficient to maintain strength or even hypertrophy, right? 1 session. That's basically where I'm at now. I just had a third kid, so that's how I seeing it. But it's for sure how it looks like. So maintaining is 1 time per week. In CrossFit, it might be, but that's a bit hypothetically even less. Why? Because you are doing obviously also metcons, and let's say you, as you just said, you focus on conditioning. You have a conditioning cycle. And but you also want to maintain strength because you're a functional athlete and not pure a marathon runner. So if you would do, for example, 1 session of compound lifts, press, back squat, and deadlift, 1 session, 70 minutes, right? That's likely more than sufficient because if you do also a lot of rowing, even high intensity rowing, you're okay in another way, but you're still hitting the same muscle groups. It's unlikely that they will all of a sudden atrophy or even lose strength while doing those movements. Certainly not when you're doing metcons like deadlifts and power cleans and so on, right? You're still using those muscles. For example, we actually have a video where we talk about how metcons per se are likely also inducing muscle growth. Right. Pure metcons from a physiological point of view. So that's what I mean. So don't be afraid to really lower your strength at that point. Going strength sessions once a week, maybe even once every 2 weeks. If you can get more volume in of the other part, conditioning, skills, whatever, this will be beneficial to your overall fitness. I would say that's a little bit a combination of training science and also just put it on CrossFit, because CrossFit we don't have those studies. I cannot assure you for sure. Again, we could do those studies, but it's not done by many researchers yet.
Yeah, I think to kind of take a 30,000 foot bird's eye view, it's really letting go of the idea of being fit every single day, right? Because obviously after 8 weeks of focused strength, it's not like you're unfit. You're just stronger. And yes, maybe your breathing is going to be a little bit harder on the cardio stuff, but you're still fit. It's just that you're not in peak CrossFit shape, right? So letting go of that, and also to your point that you just made, letting go of trying to fit everything into one training week, right? Because that is the bottleneck. Essentially, we're trying to fit everything that we need to do into 1 week, but the better question is, what should I fit in those next 6 weeks? And then what I can't fit there, I'll fit in the following 6-week block or 8-week block or 12-week block, like you said, and really make the difference between those training cycles. I see a lot of value in that, both, like you said, from the science perspective, but also in practice. because then you can actually focus on something for a while instead of trying to juggle all the plates and keep everything in the air at the same time. But we have to let go of those ideas of I want to be fit every single day to the best of my ability, and I want to do everything every week, right? That those are big limiters in my opinion when it comes to planning intelligently.
Can I have another thought on that? Maybe relate to what we just said, what Glassman wrote in his initial writings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, According to me, and I think that's also correct, is that he saw CrossFit more as a general conditioning program. Correct. So a methodology to get a human population fitter. And that's why I said you just have to do high intensity, super random, varied, not random, let's call it like this, stuff. And yeah, you will get better, more skill, fatigue resistance, and so on. And yeah, better overall health, let's call it like that, which is entirely correct on. But if you look at CrossFit as a sport, you just have to periodize, and you cannot follow those strict principles anymore, although they make up the majority of your training, metcons and so on. You still need to think about not putting everything into the hopper and getting out some nice workouts. You have to see which workouts go well together, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
a little bit how people can see it, and it's also still at this point at HQ a little a fight, right? Like a big debate. What is the most important? Where do we have to put our resources? I mean, I listen to Talking Elite Fitness sometimes, and they talk about this. Like, do we have to focus on CrossFit as a sport or CrossFit as a modality and a methodology? And yeah, that's maybe a discussion for another time. But related to periodization, this is important to understand that there are differences in thinking processes of CrossFit. And, yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and this is kind of where my question was going earlier when I asked about methodology versus sport, distinguishing what the needs are, what the goal is. Like you said, CrossFit at its base, the philosophy of CrossFit is a GPP methodology, right? But it ceased to be GPP as soon as somebody decided to make it their sport. Once it becomes your sport, it is no longer GPP. Now it's your specific sport. And so you have to fill up the GPP framework with new stuff because now your sport is specific. And I definitely agree that this is a conversation that isn't had enough because we need to make a difference between the two. And the practitioner that goes to the gym 3 days, 4 days a week, and that just wants to use CrossFit to get fitter is a very different conversation than the person that's trying to get better at the sport specifically and do all those movements for time in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah.
So I agree that this is a conversation to dive into a little bit more, definitely for another episode, because that would probably take as much time as we've taken so far. Any closing thoughts on what competitors can do to move forward besides the things that we talked about today in order to improve in their CrossFit?
Yeah, also maybe more of a controversial topic, and we totally didn't talk about this, is obviously nutrition and carbohydrate intake. Obviously, also different thoughts from Craig Glassman in the beginning as a, again, methodology as a sport. I agree with him that most people would need less carbohydrates than they actually take in as a general health perspective. But if you are looking at CrossFit as a sport, we actually just made a video literally 3 days ago about this. It's a different ball game. You need a high amount of carbohydrates as fuel because CrossFit is a high intensity sport, always working around those thresholds or above, which is shown by basic exercise sciences and also biochemistry that carbohydrates are the only energy source. So if you are in a competition or even a big training day, and you eat insufficient amount of carbohydrates, you will be low on fuel. Your tank will be empty, and this will be hampering your performance. Although, maybe I can talk about that later. So, and I think that people don't understand how much carbohydrates they actually have to eat related to let's say, high competitive sports. So I've seen studies where they cycled up to 12 grams per kilogram body weight per day. You have to think about how much that is. That's obviously on the very, very high end. But if you're talking about high profile endurance athletes and the games, CrossFit Games semifinals, we are close to that numbers, right? And you have to, as an athlete, also train your gut, train your body to absorb that amount of carbohydrates, and that's sometimes also overlooked. I think for people to improve on that, certainly. And then maybe also a little nugget that we can talk about briefly is the periodization of carbohydrates. Exactly what you just said. It's not always that we need all the carbohydrates all the time. So what, for example, I did myself a study, and also some nice literature about this, is that it's very nicely related to CrossFit. I would say that you could periodize your carbohydrate intake. So overall, you have a high carbohydrate intake. I think for competitors, it's out of the question, to be honest. Like, I don't think it works without. But you can periodize your carbohydrates just as you periodize your training. So what you can do, for example, is Monday evening, you have a hard training session, high intensity interval training. The whole Monday, you eat sufficient amount of carbohydrates. I'm talking about 4 to 6 grams per kilogram body weight that day. So that's quite high. So you're fully repleted with glycogen when you start your training session. Then you do your training session. You obviously deplete your carbohydrates to a pretty low level, and then you go to bed with only a protein shake or a keto meal. So without any carbohydrates, you sleep without any carbohydrates. You wake up, no carbohydrates. You could eat some protein, but not too much carbohydrates. And then you do a long, low intensity session the next day in very depleted glycogen state. Your liver as well as your muscles are fully depleted. And then afterwards, you eat again carbohydrates. So it has been shown that certainly capacity adaptations, so endurance capacity adaptations, are slightly higher when you do those long endurance sessions like zone 2 or zone 3 sessions in a low carbohydrate state, very low carbohydrate state, to be honest. And we have seen in cyclists, and also I think in fast walkers, so endurance sports, that this type of periodization for 5 weeks improves overall performance better than when the people just ate carbohydrates, the same amount of carbohydrates, the same amount of training during those 5 weeks. So that's something you can also think about. We made a video about this. You can look it up in our YouTube channel. And this is a possibility that also people overlook when we really talk about the highest profile athletes, to periodize your training, but also your carbohydrate intake potentially.
Yeah, I can only support everything that you just said, especially that competitors don't eat enough carbs. We could probably say that with not certainty, but pretty close to that. Even if you think that you eat enough, you could probably eat a bit more, and it will have a very positive impact on your recovery and on the quality of the next session, right? Often we're too myopic and we just think of today's training session. What about tomorrow's, right? And a better fueling is going to help tomorrow's session. And what you just said about periodization of the carbs as well, we know it works. We know it works well. But for those that want to go down that route, I would just say that just make sure you don't underfeed yourself globally, because when you're training really hard and underfeeding, this is when you go straight to hormonal problems.
Yes.
And this is very, very bad for your health. And unfortunately, we have seen that in the sport and in other sports as well. Endurance sports, I think there's a lot of underfeeding there as well, especially for amateur
I think
athletes.
you can only
you have to eat enough. You have to eat enough.
Yeah.
And if you play with the timing of those carbs and the periodization from day to day, you have to make sure that after that low intensity depleted session, you really refuel so that you're stocked up again for the next one. Otherwise, your performance and your health can pay for it.
Yeah, of course. And it's not that easy, although nowadays you have these apps where you can track it a little bit better, and also work maybe with a nutritionist that actually is up to date on the scientific literature related to that. But we're talking about 10 to even 12 grams per kilogram body weight. Those studies were done with 10 to 12 kilogram body weight, which is enormous amount of carbohydrates, which, that's probably even too much. But that means that even the periodization people just eat a lot of carbohydrates. They just periodize it differently, and not something you have to try just for fun, but thinking meticulously. And if we're talking about 1 or 2% improvements, there are some improvements to be found potentially there.
Absolutely. Gommaar, that's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show. I had a lot of fun
Same.
last time around, and I feel like I don't think we've turned around the same topics. I know we talked a bit more about nutrition and nutrition science last time,
Okay.
and I think we did some great we took some great steps forward talking about training in general and especially the planning of training. I really think that I mean, like I said, we see this in the very same light, you and I, and we're both convinced that this is the next frontier in thinking more intelligently about programming and performing in CrossFit. But I want to thank you for coming on and putting all this together. Where can people follow you? We've mentioned your YouTube channel. We've mentioned your Instagram account. Give us the names of those. We'll put them in the description too, so people can come and follow you if they haven't yet.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So wod-science always the same. So on Instagram, wod-science, wod_science, and YouTube is wod minus and then science. And yeah, we also have a website. I mean, where we actually put out many blogs on. I mean, it's basically the Instagram posts, but then in a findable way. So, for example, if you type in carbohydrates, then you can also find the studies where we worked with in a clickable link, because Instagram is a nightmare. You cannot find any blogs and you cannot click any links, right? So that's why also YouTube is much better, because the links in the description are clickable. So I would say, scroll through our YouTube channel. The titles should be clear related to which topics we're covering. Certainly the similar topics as we discussed. And then, we also just launched, as I just said, this programming for RX, I would say athletes, advanced athletes, where we try to periodicize your training and actually use some of the training principles where we talked about now, to improve your overall fitness. And we also have some, let's say, some fixed programs, which is pretty cool, where we also have a 12-week cycle where you can just go for strength endurance while also maintaining your functional fitness. And that's something that not many people have on their programming. And that's how we try to also put a little bit of ideas into practice, because that's also how you learn. And then stay up to date, certainly with future studies, because what I, for example, wanted to do definitely is incorporating zone 2 into a study. So some way or another, having the same training volume, but then with one group doing zone 2 and the other group doing high intensity work, see who improves the best in certain capacities. Again, with the wod-science platform, it's feasible. We can put a master thesis student on this, and so helping the community in that case as well.
Well, you heard it. Go follow wod-science everywhere that you can. Instagram, YouTube. Go check out their website as well and their brand new program. Gommaar, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and I look forward to doing another one soon.
Yes, see you soon. Thanks,
Take
Sean.
care. Thanks a lot for watching this episode. If you want to support the show, there are two good ways that you can do so. You can leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you can help grow this community by sharing this episode on your social media. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you in the next episode.